The day Silas Crow uttered the words, "Pick anything you want," he believed he was speaking from a place of power. Not fate, not mercy, and certainly not love. Because Silas Crow had survived the frontier by believing ownership was the same thing as order. That if a man could claim land, cattle, guns, and silence, then nothing could ever truly take from him again. And so when the traveling trader spread his wares beneath the canvas awning, blankets, dyed red and blue iron tools, mirrors, trinkets, and human lives bound by chains, Silas's voice carried the same weight it always did, low and confident, meant for his daughters alone, meant to buy them a moment of delight, in a world that had already stolen too much from them, because since their mother's grave had been filled with dry soil and prayerless words, Clara and May had learned that joy was something you selected carefully, like a fragile object that might shatter if held wrong, and Silas expected them to point to a doll or a ribbon or maybe a small pony tethered nearby, anything harmless, anything replaceable, but the moment stretched too long, and when he followed the direction of Clara's outstretched finger, his certainty cracked like old wood under sudden weight, because she was not pointing to a thing but to a woman, kneeling in the dirt with chains biting into her wrists, her posture straight despite the iron, her dark braids resting against her shoulders like quiet defiance, her face unreadable yet alive in a way the other captives were not, and May echoed her sister's choice before Silas could speak, her small voice steady as if she were naming the sky or the sun, saying they wanted that Apache woman as their mother, not knowing the word mother could still cut a man open even years after burial, not knowing that the woman they pointed to was named Nia, not knowing she had once stood on red earth beneath wide skies, with a child of her own strapped to her back, not knowing she had sung prayers into the night that the wind itself seemed to carry, and the trader laughed because men often laugh when something unsettles them, and the crowd leaned in because cruelty is curious by nature. But Silas did not laugh, did not shout, did not strike, because in that single heartbeat he saw something that terrified him more than rebellion or shame. He saw recognition in the woman's eyes as she looked at his daughters, not pleading, not begging, but seeing them as human, and the truth of that look struck him harder than any accusation ever could, because his daughters had not chosen ownership, they had chosen belonging, and Silas felt the ground shift beneath the life he had built on rules and survival, and he wanted to say no, wanted to explain that people were not things, that the world did not work that way, that the frontier demanded hard choices, but his daughters' faces were open and certain, unafraid, and the silence pressed in until Silas realized that whatever he said next would follow him longer than any gunshot echo. And so he bought Nia not as a prize but as a promise he did not yet understand, a promise that would unravel everything he believed about power, family, and redemption, because when he unlocked the chains and saw her wrists bleed and watched his daughters instinctively reach for her, hands as if she already belonged with them, Silas Crow felt something dangerous awaken in his chest, something like hope, something like reckoning. And if you want to know what happens when a hardened man meets a truth spoken by children, when a broken family collides with a woman who refuses to be broken, then stay with this story, because it only grows deeper from here. And if this chapter stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Nia did not trust kindness, not at first, because kindness without freedom is often just another shape of cruelty. And as the wagon carried her away from the market toward Silas Crow's ranch, she memorized every turn of the road, every rise of the land, not for escape yet but for truth, for knowing where she stood in the world that had been torn from her. And Silas sensed this vigilance, respected it in silence, because the man he had been before would have demanded gratitude, obedience, submission. But the man he was becoming did none of those things, and instead he offered space, awkward words, and actions that spoke louder than apologies he did not yet know how to make. And the girls filled the gaps between them with laughter and questions and small offerings, a ribbon, a flower, a half-eaten apple, gestures of welcome that bypassed language entirely. And slowly the ranch transformed from a place of loss into a place of listening, where Nia cooked not as a servant but as a keeper of stories, where she sang songs in a language the girls learned by sound and heart, where Silas found himself unlearning the violence he had mistaken for strength, and the town noticed, because towns always notice change, and not all of them approved, whispers crawling like insects through saloons and church pews, calling Nia savage, calling Silas weak, warning him that the frontier did not forgive men who crossed invisible lines. But when danger came in the form of men who believed they could reclaim what had once been sold. Silas stood not as an owner but as a father, and Nia stood not as a captive but as a mother, and the girls stood between them fearless, because love had already taught them who they were, and when the dust settled and the threat passed, Silas understood that family was not built by blood or purchase, but by choice repeated every day, especially on the hardest ones, and Nia understood that survival did not mean closing the heart forever. And the girls understood something even wiser, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is see someone as they are and say, "You belong with us." And years later, when Clara and May told the story, they never spoke of chains or markets first. They spoke of a man who listened, a woman who endured, and a family that chose one another against the expectations of an unforgiving world. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that compassion can rewrite even the harshest beginnings, then subscribe to the channel, because stories like this deserve to be carried forward, shared, and remembered.